Well, I sort of referred to this earlier in the broadcast, but the fact is this new poll has some very dismal findings here. I mean, people don't seem to have much confidence in any institution anymore, and I think this probably goes beyond government, but just a couple of things. They still like the FBI. 51% of the people think the FBI, they have a favorable rating. The Central Intelligence Agency, below 50%. Department of Homeland Security, Environmental Protection Agency, they're down to a cool 39% in favorable. Secret Service, they're down to 38%. Centers for Disease Control has now fallen below the Secret Service in the confidence that people have. They have 37%. Same with the Food and Drug Administration. The IRS, which should be, it seems to me, the one agency that we all have confidence in, only 31% have a favorable rating there. And then, of course, we have the Veterans Administration. We know about all that. Jeffrey, I think this is a very serious problem. And as I just said, I think this may be more serious than the Ebola crisis.
Well, I think it is, but I think it also, there's a certain luxury to condemn the institutions that basically have been functioning for a long, long time. Look, we have 9,200 infections in Africa. We have 4,555 deaths. And we have 5 cases in the U.S., and most of which have been handled well. We're in a position, we as a highly developed Western country have the luxury of criticizing our institutions, and people keep holding the Apollo program as the gold standard example. Why can't the fight against Ebola be the Apollo program? Well, the Apollo program wasn't always the Apollo program. We lost 3 people in a launch pad fire. We nearly lost 3 people on Apollo 13. It's only in retrospect that we say this was the perfect Swiss watch functioning organization. I think when the long history of the Ebola crisis is written, we're going to look back and say, yeah, there were some stutter steps. We were trying to find our way in a very murky situation, but we got it under control and we made this work. I just think we have to stop finger pointing and blame laying when we're in the middle of a crisis.
But what disturbs me, and what I think what bothers me, is that these institutions, so many of them, I mean, people have just lost confidence. I mean, you know, the things you used to accept, I mean, and took for granted, you're now surprised when it works out right.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're living in an age of skepticism or an age of cynicism, but it's one or the other, and it's not just government, Bob. You know, your own poll shows, ours have over the last couple of years, it's other institutions in society. It's churches, it's the police, even the Supreme Court, which used to be above what the sort of the dirtier politicians were doing, well, it's plummeted in public approval as well. And you have to admit that the series of government missteps, starting with Hurricane Katrina, I suppose, but you've got a VA scandal, an IRS scandal, you had the botched rollout of the healthcare website, and now you have White House intruders jumping over the fence. Well, these are all feeding what I think was already going to be there anyway, which is a lot of skepticism that now is probably morphing into cynicism about institutions in the country.
Do you think it has anything to do with social media and the fact that we're just bombarded with all this information 24 hours nonstop?
You know, I do think it has something to do with human nature, which is to construct a narrative. And now we have so many more data points to plug into that narrative at any given time. We hear about things we might not have heard about in the past. And then there's also our political process. Look at how quickly Ebola has instantly morphed into a political issue in our House and Senate campaigns. I mean, you can almost chart a relationship between the more embattled and endangered the incumbent and the more quickly he or she has been to endorse a travel ban, for example, on flights from West Africa, purely political grandstanding, if you listen to the experts. And, you know, I think that undermines confidence as well, that politics is really much more theatrical at a time when it's fairly clear Congress isn't going to be contributing anything meaningful in a legislative or an oversight sense to combating this Ebola epidemic.
All right. Well, thank you all very much to help us put it into some context anyway.